It's like biting into something sweet but tasting bitterness. Like standing in the sunlight without feeling its warmth. Like driving fast, foot on the gas, but never breaking 50. That's life without your soulmate. It may still move, but it doesn't move right. It plays, but it's offbeat. You don't always know what's missing, though, only that something is. And after a while, you settle for bitterness, convincing yourself it's tasty. India had lived in that hollow rhythm so long, it seemed like the part of her that once danced to it had died. This morning, she woke before the sun, as usual, jasmine tea in hand. She stepped onto the balcony to greet the dawn, watering her plants with a quiet grace. She bathed in golden rays as she showered, meditating on all she was still grateful for. 2 hours later, like clockwork, Greg rose at 8. He made breakfast, helped get the kids dressed, played his part in their tightly choreographed family routine. But in the bustle of kids and breakfast, they missed each other. It was always moving, performing, but no feeling, not a glance, not a brush of skin, not a wink or a playful slap on the butt, not even a good morning. As they were heading out, India stopped him. She reached for his arm gently, grounding him in place, trying to pull him into her presence. She looked into his eyes and found the same thing she always did: cold, detached emptiness. Still, she offered her warmth, hoping something would spark. "Hope to see you tonight," she said softly, rubbing the inside of his forearm. Her eyes searched his face, clinging to some sliver of tenderness. Greg shifted, avoiding the pull of her gaze. "You know I don't bother with that stuff," he mumbled, eyes already drifting past her. "Just once," she whispered, barely audible. "I wrote a piece about us. I'd love for you to hear it." "I've got a lot of work to finish, India." Her grip tightened, just slightly, eyes shimmering. "Just once." Her plea hung between them like an unfinished lyric. Greg finally met her eyes and tried to return a hint of her warmth. It wasn't even half of what she needed, but it was more than he usually gave, so she accepted it. "I'll try," he offered, brushing a loose lock from her face and stroking her cheek. She smiled, because in that moment she saw a flicker of the man she married, the one who used to notice her warmth, the man who could let himself fall into that warmth occasionally. She prayed this version would stay, and for a fleeting second, she felt happy. Happier than she'd been in a long time. But Greg and India had the kind of love that looked good only on paper. House? Check. Kids? Check. Degrees? Businesses? Stability? Check, check, check. But all those check marks only filled the boxes. They never touched the soul. Because even with all that, she could still feel Greg merely tolerating her. She saw it in his eyes at the kids' birthday parties, in his body language during every anniversary dinner, in the way he refused to write wedding vows, as if love were just a contract to be signed. But India was a lover of love, a collector of moments, a woman who needed more than just presence. She craved connection, words, depth, softness, fire. She wanted a love that didn't just exist, but lived, breathed, danced, listened. Greg never understood that part of her. To him, poetry was a hobby, a distraction. He'd say, focus on what pays the bills. He didn't bother to read her poems, didn't ask about the sacred metaphors that bled from her chest onto the page, didn't recognize that the love in those verses was the same love she had once tried, desperately, to pour into him. India wanted him to see her fire, the part of her that burned with feeling, the part that once burned for him. But he never paid attention, never noticed when the flame started dying. That was her first sign they were no longer aligned. Despite the flame in her marriage dying, India kept writing, kept showing up, even when her passion felt like a secret affair, one that allowed her to escape from the cold silence inside her own home. Because something inside her refused to settle for a life void of feeling, emotional depth, passion. And she didn't even realize how deeply she needed to be seen as a poet, as a lover, as the other half of a sacred puzzle until she met Jante. The theater hums with quiet conversation and the scent of sticky eucalyptus and sunflowers. Dim lights cast a golden hue across exposed brick walls, aged wood beams, and lush velvet curtains. The decor is far from polished, but it breathes history and poetry. Jante leans back in his seat, one arm stretched across the back of the chair beside him. He came to support a friend performing spoken word tonight, but he's barely listening to the man on stage because he senses her before he sees her. A bright spirit in need of light. Third row, center aisle. Skin like burnt honey, curls gathered high and wild. She's sitting with perfect posture, but something's off. Her face is beautiful, but tired. Bright, but dim. The kind of spirit that spent a lifetime living in the shadows of people far less talented. People who feared her shine, so they taught her to fear it as well. Her energy is drained from fighting. Her soul carries fears and traumas that were never hers to bear. She is love and art personified. But she's been handled by filthy hands that didn't know her value. She's surrounded by people, yet she looks completely alone. Like her body's here, but her mind is somewhere far away. Jante tilts his head, studies her. He doesn't know her name, but something about her feels like deja vu, the kind that brings dreams that could have been memories. And then he hears it. Next up, India Cole. She stands, their eyes lock, not for long, a second too short to mean something, a second too long to mean nothing. She walks to the stage in slow, intentional steps. The crowd claps, but Jante barely hears it. His world narrows to the sound of her boots on wooden floorboards. India steps to the mic, clears her throat, looks out at the crowd, but not at him. Still, he leans in, like she's speaking only to him. And then she begins. Hoped you'd show, just for one night. No need for grand or perfect scenes. Just you and all the space between. I light the room, I pour the wine. I smile like everything's just fine, but silence sits across from me. Your absence, loud as it can be. I don't want much. Not diamond rings, just tenderness and little things. Your eyes on mine, a touch, a glance, a moment where I stand a chance. Would you have noticed if I cried? Or sensed the part of me that died? I don't need vows or skies blue. Just want you to notice. I notice you. Jante exhales slowly. He hadn't even realized he was holding his breath. Because now, he knows two things. Her name is India. And, whatever this feeling is, it's as sacred as the ancestors' unspoken prayers. India walks off stage. Her piece lingers in the air like incense. Slow, sacred, unforgettable. Jante watches her disappear behind the curtain, and something in him stirs. He hadn't planned to perform tonight. He didn't even bring anything written. But something about her made his heart pick up a pen. The host returns to the stage. We got room for one more, if anybody's feeling brave tonight. Jante stands. No announcement. No hesitation. Just motion. Like the mic had always been his. Like this moment was pre-written in someone's journal entry. India returned to the audience, sitting in the crowd, and she catches movement out of the corner of her eye. Her tired gaze lifts and widens. It's him. The man who looked at her like she wasn't just seen, but understood. He steps to the mic, adjusts it, doesn't clear his throat, doesn't need to. His voice is low, like jazz at midnight, unrehearsed, intimate. I always told myself that if I ever met love, I'd wrap my arms around her and never let go. I'd tell her how treasured she was, how her essence could fill a room like no one else. I promised that if I ever met beauty, I'd treat her right. Take her out, make her laugh, show her that those other men didn't miss her because she wasn't worthy. They missed her because they were blind. I always knew that if I met class, I'd greet her gently, meet her wherever she stood, and kiss her softly, like I was saying grace. So, when she walked on that stage, in a green wrap top and caramel brown pants, carrying all three qualities like they were stitched into her skin, my spirit rose, time stilled, and my soul filled. Because even though she looked sad, even though something in her eyes said she'd been overlooked, underloved, underappreciated, I saw her. So I wrote this to make her smile, to let her know you are treasured. Those other men were blind, and how do you do? India tries not to react, but a slow, soft smile escapes her lips, unguarded and real. Her eyes say, I know you're talking about me. But her body stays still, unsure what to do with this kind of attention. Jante smiles back, not cocky, grateful. He lifts his hand, kisses the air, and blows it softly her way. Smooth. He grabbed a sunflower off the wreath wrapped around the railing and walked over to hand it to India. Bowed, then walked off. Like her smile fixed something broken inside him. Like this moment was enough. They parted ways that night without speaking. Both respected their current situations with their spouses. A silent gaze and a warm smile would be the extent of their soul-charging exchange for tonight. Just for tonight. India arrived home with the sunflower in her hair and the lines of the poem written for her in her heart. This man who knew her all of 15 minutes had acknowledged, processed, and reflected her light back to her in ways her own husband had never even attempted to. She felt seen. But she knew this could be a slippery slope. She wanted to fight for her marriage, and no stranger was going to change that. But she could enjoy the fantasy innocently, right? Just as she began to savor the sweetness of the moment, Greg opened the door to let her in. Didn't even bother to offer an explanation as to why he didn't show up to her showcase. Just opened the door and walked away. She followed him into the bedroom quietly so she didn't wake the kids. "What happened to you tonight?" she asked as she began undressing. Greg tossed his hands up in the air and blew air out of his mouth aggressively. Frustrated, she even questioned him. "I know you have a lot going on, but I need you to try to show up. Be present, somehow. I'm losing hope," she said as he lay in bed and leaned against the headboard, hands clasped tightly as he focused intensely on the bra she tossed on the floor. "I don't know what you want from me," he replied, eyebrow arched, head tilted. "I don't do smoke-filled theaters and rooms filled with hippies dressed like Harry Potter characters. India, that's your thing," he said coldly, not even meeting her eyes. He had been honest about his disdain for artists and deep fillers. They annoyed him, plain and simple. But she was both, and she was also his wife. That meant she was different, right? In this moment, she wasn't so sure. "That's horribly offensive," she said, chuckling uncomfortably at his incredibly insensitive joke she wasn't even sure was even a joke. "I'm just asking you to be there for me, your wife, your partner," she said, kneeling beside the bed, holding his hand to her chest. "Your friend," she pleaded, searching his eyes as she always did, but as always, there was nothing there. "As my spouse, partner, and friend, I need you to understand that I can't be in those places with those people." "Even if your wife is one of them?" she asked, hoping to elicit a warmer response by softening the topic. "Even if my wife is one of them," he said so sternly. End of topic. There was no stretching for him, and there never was. India had always been a creative, a writer, a poet, and a deep filler. But Greg only approved of her utilizing her talents if she wrote for $1 million TV show. She had initially put her passion for writing aside for her career and their family. Even though she dimmed her creative light for him because it made him uncomfortable when she talked in big circles about art and the patterns of words and concepts she could pen in her poetry. A year after their youngest started school, she felt numb. She was making a lot of money, but her heart for creating was only pumping cash. She needed to feel something real, loud, and raw, so she started going to poetry nights to get her fix. The environment brought her back to life, and she wanted Greg to see that. She needed him to see how alive she felt on the stage, but she had no plans to stop just because he was uncomfortable with her talents and the spaces that helped her shape her creative gifts. And nights like that night, where her pleas fell on deaf ears, made her realize that she would never receive her husband's support. How could you face a truth so cold without resenting your partner? But India was a woman of values and morals, so she continued to honor her vows and the men she made them to, hoping that love would change his mind. But honestly, the stranger's words were on her mind. She heard him loudly every time she took her dawn showers. She'd hear him as the water soothed the aching of her failing marriage, saying, because even though she looked sad, even though something in her eyes said she'd been overlooked, underloved, underappreciated, I saw her. He saw her. There was something in his gaze that said he meant every word. She never felt so acknowledged as she did in that moment. But he was just a stranger. And if he knew, truly knew her, he'd probably run for the hills. So she moved on with her life, working, kids, marital obligations. But to tell the truth, ever since that day, for India, nothing was ever the same again. Jante had a long flight to catch back home after the open mic night at Grand Lyric Theater. He was in town on business, overseeing a short term project, and had a few hours to return home and relieve his longtime girlfriend of their 8-year-old daughter. He had a good time during his visit to his hometown. He got to visit his parents, eat at restaurants he frequented as a teen, met up with friends, and even got to see a friend he met in a Facebook group perform. Of all the things he got to do that filled him with joy, meeting India seemed to be at the top of his list. This seemed strange because she was a stranger. A beautiful stranger, but a stranger still. Something about her lit up the old, dim, and dusty theater, and a small portion of his life. Seeing her sadness did something to him. It was like seeing a valuable diamond on the ground covered in dirt. But knowing his poem made her smile, made her happy, even in the tiniest way, made him happier than anything else ever could. As he arrived home, his girlfriend greeted him at the door as she always did. "How was your flight, my love?" she said, closing the door with her foot and enveloping him into a sweet kiss as she caressed his thick locks. "It was long," he said, exhaling and rubbing the small of her back. Chantel kissed Jante intimately, alternating between sucking on his bottom and top lip as she rubbed her nose with his. Eskimo kisses is what she liked to call them. Her affectionate nature made Jante feel desired, but there were other things he needed too. "Don't you have to get to work?" he asked in between kisses. "It can wait," she said, removing her top slowly, then undoing her bra as she reached into his pants. She grabbed him in a demanding manner, like she owned him. He hated when she did that. She tried massaging him as she pressed herself onto him, forced his hand onto her chest, made him squeeze her as she tried to awaken him. But just as he started to feel himself rise, Rennie, their 8-year-old, ran into the room. "Daddy's back," she said. "Rennie, baby," she said impatiently. "What did Mommy tell you about coming into rooms without permission?" "Hey, Chantel, she... Stay out of it, Jante," she snapped. "Go back into the room until I tell you to come out," she said. But Jante wasn't having it. He grabbed Rennie and embraced her. "She just happy to see her daddy," he said, kissing her forehead. "Juice?" Rennie asked her dad as she fidgeted with his locks. "Of course," he said as he walked into the kitchen with her. Just as he sat her down on the counter and opened the refrigerator, he heard the front door slam violently. Jante didn't feel bad. His lover only ever wanted to be lovers, but she neglected the other parts of their relationship most of the time. She never truly even looked at him unless he was inside of her. This topic had been the center of many heated arguments. Jante felt his head begin to ache as he thought of the possibility of another heated exchange once Chantel returned home. He felt the pressure building in his chest from all the mean things he just knew she would say. Punishment for him refusing her sexual advances. She got mean when she didn't get her way, downright verbally abusive. Jante started to think about their last heated exchange, how they yelled so loud that Rennie hid from them. She hid so long, they thought she had left and called the cops, only to find her hidden behind old suitcases in their bedroom closet. She told them she was afraid of the scary words they used against each other, how it made her feel afraid to look at them in that state of anger. After that day, he promised to never let that happen in front of Rennie again, but he was tired of always having to bend for her. She had committed a lot of deal breakers in their relationship, but The words hurt worse than anything she could ever do. Seeing their daughter so affected hurt worse than the ugly words that cut him deep. He took out his phone and did what he always did. I'll make it up to you later. He sent this text with the gif of a man winking. Even though he had pushed his pride to the side to make amends, she left him on red all day. He called her 2 hours before her scheduled shift in time, the time she usually took a break, but she didn't answer. Damn, he mumbled, already bracing for the hostility she would bring home with her. No bad words, Rennie yelled from her bed. In an attempt to get ahead of the situation, he rushed to feed, bathe, and put their 8-year-old daughter to sleep. He ran Chantal a bath, lit candles, and played soft R&B. He set the mood so when she got home, she wouldn't have the time to lash out. She walked in with her heels in one hand, her water bottle in the other, and her purse hanging off her shoulder. She stared at Jante and gave him that "I know what you're trying to do" look as she set her bag onto the leather couch. She then sat her heels and her water bottle on the bathroom floor and slammed the door. He heard her exhale slowly as she splashed into the warm bath and felt a sense of relief. If he could get her calmed just a little, he could prevent the big blow-up from happening. He went into bed and waited for her to return, but instead, he heard the guest room door close. Jante felt the relief settle onto him as he sunk deeper into his plush velvet duvet. He knew she was still upset, but his promise to his daughter was kept. For that night, Rennie could feel safe thinking her parents still loved each other. Jante took out his phone and rewatched clips of the poetry event. His friend sent him clips of the poem he had written for India. It had gone viral. Everyone in the comments was asking if he shot his shot. "I want to know how this ends because that poem?" Fire emoji, one commenter said. Toward the end, the cameraman got a glimpse of the smile India flashed him before it ended, and the smile on her face, a stark contrast to the sad look she walked in with, gave him hope. And ever since that day, for Jante, nothing was the same. India was full of hope as she did her rounds around the Grand Lyric Theater before the event started. She had taken a job as the director and took it upon herself to revamp the aged theater, not to improve it, but to sharpen the wisdom and history the building offered. Greg had not set foot into the theater and vehemently disagreed with her decision to quit screenwriting to care for a broken down money pit. His words. But she loved this money pit and refused to part with it. She told him clearly that if he continued to boycott her decision, she would file. So he did his best to pretend to be supportive, did everything short of actually coming to the theater. She desired a spouse who would support her decisions, but she settled for one who would just pretend so that he wouldn't lose her. India had a meeting with her staff for the night, informing them that they had a full house for their poetry jam night. Even had some popular poets signed up to read their pieces for the night. The theater upgrades and frequent events had attracted the attention of some very famous artists and writers. India had invited some of her screenwriting contacts to get some writers' deals on television shows, movies, and even songs for movie soundtracks. She felt good, like she was finally making a difference. The theater started to fill up with artists, supportive family, friends, and agents. India took her place on the stage and introduced herself, introduced the event and the night's beautiful host. She loved opening the show. Seeing all those creatives excited her. She heard the crowd hooting and cheering for her as she stepped off, but she lost her footing as she reached the last step and felt herself slip. Just before she hit the floor, she felt a strong, muscular frame swoop beside her and hold her firmly to ensure she gained her footing. it was him, the man who wrote her the poem. The moment was fuzzy. 1 second she was fighting for her life, heels clicking and tipping, and the next she was in his arms. They just stood there, wrapped in a strange sort of calm, as his hands wrapped around her waist and hers around his shoulders, staring intensely into each other's eyes as if love had wrapped around them tightly and refused to let go. She felt at home. He felt needed. But they were strangers. Strangers committed to others. And the realization sent them flying to the other side of the room, ensuring they stayed far away from each other for the rest of the night. Jante was invited to read his poem, the poem he wrote for her, as the opening act of the show. His poem had gone viral. No matter who shared it, it always got millions of views and thousands of comments. India knew Jante would be trouble, but after seeing the comments, she realized she had underestimated the amount of trouble he could be. They wanted to know if they ever got together, if the woman he wrote the poem for ever gave him a chance, if they would be the next great love story of the internet. India was a woman of value and morals, and her vows meant way more to her than some random man who was good at his craft. They both let the media play with the idea of them potentially getting together, but last she heard, he was in a happy relationship and so was she. This had no chance of ever being anything but a one-time encounter. A beautiful poem that spoke life into her. That's all it would ever be, and she was okay with that. The event went great. There was a vibe that just couldn't be created without the synergy of the perfect artist and the perfect audience. There was a band playing covers of popular R&B songs in the background. No lyrics, no vocals, just the music. There were candles, fresh sunflowers and eucalyptus on the corner tables, and at the entrance, couples were dancing with their significant others in between the poetry readings. This was a place where love thrived, and she wished Greg would have been there for her to dance with. She sat in the audience to enjoy some of the artist's poem before retiring to her office to prepare for the next event. She heard a knock on the door as she prepared to do her final walk around and walked directly into Jante, who was standing at her door. She jumped back faster than he could say hello. "What are you doing here?" she said in a frustrated tone as she fixed her blazer. "I came to say goodnight," he said. His smile was big and bright. "Good night," she said coldly as she walked away, heels clicking faster than her heartbeat. "Chemistry doesn't mean compromise," he said in a calm tone, sensing her hesitation. "What?" she said, turning to meet his gaze. "The poem wasn't for you. It was for me. I wanted to cheer up a beautiful stranger who seemed sad. It did that. That doesn't have to mean anything if you don't want it to," he said, walking toward her. She didn't reply, just stood there, hoping the desire to want it to be more would disintegrate. But you know, this has the potential to be more. People who weren't even there that night felt it. That means you felt it too. "Did you?" she asked, adjusting her handbag from one hand to the other nervously. "I felt something," he said, "but I understand your situation and I respect it." She chuckled lightly, sarcastically. "What is your definition of respect?" she asked jokingly. He chuckled with her. The tension in the moment eased just a little. "I respect your situation and mine. I just don't want to feel like we did something wrong because we had great chemistry. That's not compromising our morals or values. It's respecting our intuition," he said. She caught a whiff of his cologne as his hands gestured between them. He smelled of sweet incense and honey. She got lost in his energy for a moment. That smile, that scent, that face. She had to end the conversation or this conversation would end her. Thank you for the poem, she said, shaking his hand, and good night. She then stood back, making it clear she would not continue the conversation. He gave her a nod and stepped back as well. Good night, India, he said, but neither of them walked away. The line clicked. Then the host spoke, and her words sent a chill through India's entire being. You are stuck in a wrong turn, but God doesn't want you to find the road back just yet. There will be a collision, and He needs you there for now. There was a pause, a deep inhale. Then, I urge you not to turn around. Continue the road you've been driving. The divine route will make sense later. Goodbye. Click. Silence. Then, faintly, she heard the host whisper to her team. That was intense. That was the first time I envisioned a death. I need a minute. India hadn't been sleeping well. Nights now came in long stretches of silence. She'd lie in bed with a candle flickering on the dresser, letting the soft hum of her favorite podcast, The Divine Route, settle over her like a weighted blanket. It didn't heal the ache, but it helped her subdue it temporarily. Sometimes, the host's voice said gently, it's not your heart that's broken. It's your spirit, tired of pretending. It doesn't need more. India pressed pause. She sat up, her journal still open in her lap, the poem she'd been trying to write hanging somewhere between her heart and her head. It was about a man she hadn't spoken to in almost a year. A man who looked at her like she was more than just seen, like she was understood. She hadn't told anyone about that night at the Grand Lyric, not even her therapist. It wasn't infidelity, but it wasn't innocent. Her phone buzzed on the couch cushion beside her. Greg. She stared at the message, chewing the inside of her cheek. He always thought about them, but never enough to change. She locked the screen, reached for the remote, pressed play. Divine interventions feel like chaos when you're addicted to control. But what if the disruption is the first form of direction? Her chest tightened. She closed the journal, blew out the candle, and let the room fall into darkness. Across town, Jante was also awake. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, phone screen dim in the soft light. Chantal was asleep behind him, one arm flung across the pillow like a child, clinging to dreams. Her phone buzzed hours ago. She said it was her cousin. But cousins don't call at midnight, and you usually don't arrive home soaked in the smell of their cologne. Not unless they're the wrong kind of cousins. He stood slowly, walking into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. Then he opened his notes app, the one where he wrote poems too raw to share. He stared at the words, saved the draft. Then he opened another. He turned off the jazz, returned to the bed, and stared at the ceiling. India and Jante had done nothing wrong, but they weren't even sure what right meant anymore. India met Greg at the restaurant 30 minutes after their scheduled time. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that swallowed roads whole. Her Uber driver had slowed to avoid collisions, carefully navigating through invisible lanes hidden beneath gallons of water. India's umbrella shielded her from the storm, protecting the effort she had made to glam up for Greg despite the tense state of their marriage. She desired to look good for him. Her auburn locks were curled and pinned up, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. She couldn't stop fidgeting with the one loose curl near her temple as Greg stood to pull out her chair and kissed her softly on the cheek. She held all the cards now, the power to keep her marriage or fold it for good. And that alone made her hands quiver slightly as she lifted the cup of water to her lips, delaying her response to his greeting. How have you been? He asked, reaching for the hand that held the glass. It was still damp from condensation. He squeezed it so tight she nearly lost feeling. She looked around the expensive restaurant. distracted by the free-flowing bohemian decor that reminded her of an old jazz club. Greg knew she loved places like this. Did he have a change of heart? She wondered. I've been good, she said finally, returning a light squeeze. Greg searched her eyes intently. She recognized that look. She had given him the same one every morning for years. But now he was looking for the woman he married. And she wasn't sure she could find that woman for him. Not anymore. They sat in silence. Greg stared as if trying to summon the past in her face. She looked back, coldly but patient. It was a strange flip of the script. The tables had turned, and holding the power didn't feel as good as she thought it might. Not for India. The waiter arrived, and India took her time browsing the menu, asking for clarity on different dishes before finally ordering. When the waiter left, Greg reached for her hand again and locked eyes with her. I want you to come home, India, he said softly, eyes misty. India blinked slowly, heart guarded, and waited for him to continue. I've been difficult, I know. You needed my support, and I abandoned you at a time when you needed me the most. I never meant to make you feel tolerated. You're the love of my life. If you come home, I promise there won't be a day where you second guess that again. I swear it, honey. If I come home? She asked, her brow arched so high it nearly kissed her sleek edges. Yes, I need you there. The kids need you there. We're a family, India. Please. He kissed her hand this time, desperate, tender. And if I don't? She asked, voice still. I'll continue to suffer in silence without the woman who holds the biggest piece of my heart. But will you continue to try? I have been trying. No, you've been trying to get me home. That tells me nothing about the progress you've made to fix things that got us here in the first place. Separated on our anniversary. Her tone was cold, but firm. She needed more than sweet words and sentiments. I've been trying to fix this mess. You leaving widened the gap, made it damn near impossible to fix anything, but I have been trying. His eyes held onto hers, still searching, still lost. India didn't respond. She took a bite of her lobster fettuccine and said, If I wrote a poem for you, would that get you back home? He asked sarcastically. You don't write poems, Greg, she said with a smirk. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket and began reading aloud. Her heart stuttered after the first few lines. They were eerily familiar. I always told myself that if I ever met love, I'd wrap my arms around her and never let go. I'd tell her how treasured she was, how her essence could fill a room like no one else. He continued, reading it all. Once he finished, India sat expressionless. No tears, no words, just silence. Let me show you something else, he said, unlocking his phone. He played a video clip, an audience recording from the night India last saw Jante. It showed him catching her eye. Their gaze lingered. Two people standing still while the world around them moved. Greg paused it near the end and zoomed in. Look at how close you are. How you're looking at each other, he whispered. This isn't an ambush, India. I promise. I noticed a change in you 2 years ago. So I did some digging. I found the viral poem. Then I found this. I just want to know, is this why you're pulling away from me? India snickered. The nerve. I can't believe you even noticed when I pulled away. You've ignored my feelings for years. Well, I noticed, he said, and it's been painful. India continued eating in silence. She drank her wine slowly, glancing at the time. When she finished, she collected her things and ordered her Uber. This isn't out of malice, she said softly, almost to herself. I just don't know how to handle this. For years, it had always been the other way around. Her begging him for warmth, for love, for partnership. Now it was him. The desperation on his face was painful. But was it real? Or just competition? As her Uber pulled up, she slipped in her earphones and pressed play on The Divine Route. The host's voice poured into her ears like sacred water. Your wrong turn will take you for granted until they see the light of your final merge shining through you. They'll sense the shift and try to fight for you, but it'll feel wrong because it is. They don't want you, they want to win. Tears welled in India's eyes. She wiped them away before they fell. It wasn't that Jante was right for her. It was that she always knew Greg was wrong for her. How do you say goodbye to someone who was your whole world for 17 years? Jante spent the entire night digging through old purses, laptops, iPads, and anything he could find. It started with a weird post from one of Chantel's Facebook friends. Something cryptic. Chantel had been tagged in it. She hadn't commented or liked it, but she also hadn't responded to any of Jante's calls or texts that day. Every call rang out. Every message remained marked delivered, never read, and her shift had ended over 4 hours ago. By the time he went back to check the post again, it was gone. The friend had blocked him. That was all he needed to unravel. He tore their bedroom apart, yanking open drawers, flipping through laundry baskets, sifting through makeup bags. He was looking for anything: a condom, a receipt, a picture. But all he found were old credit card bills, loose earrings, lip gloss tubes dried shut, junk. He moved to her older devices. That's when he found them: photos, seductive ones, poses in lingerie he'd never even seen before, pictures of her from angles reserved for lovers, intimate snapshots she never sent him. On her laptop, there were photos of Chantel and that Facebook friend together at a restaurant, again at what looked like his home. Jante snapped. He hurled the laptop across the room, then charged into the bedroom and began packing her things. He stuffed suitcases and old purses with her underwear, her makeup, her jackets, shoes, even expensive perfume. He removed her vanity mirror from the dresser, laid it flat on top of the things he put on the porch, then shut the door and latched it so she couldn't get in. His hands trembled, his ears burned, his head throbbed with a rage so volatile it seemed to come from outside of him. He punched the wall over and over until his knuckles stung. All those times she said she was working late, all those sleepovers at her friend's house, all those nights she left Rennie to grab some food. She wasn't working. She wasn't with friends. She was with him. It all made sense now, but not the kind of sense that brought closure. This was the kind of clarity that brought corrosion to the heart, to the soul. Jante knew if she walked through the door right now, the things he'd say would be so lethal they'd never recover. Not as co-parents, not as people. He forced himself into a cold shower. He needed to come back to earth, to remember his daughter, his anchor, his reason. After drying off, he tried calling Chantel one more time. No answer. Defeated, he picked up his phone and tapped play on his favorite podcast. He turned the volume up all the way and placed it on the nightstand. The voice of the host filled the room. It's not a question of if they'll leave you. It's a question of when. Or better yet, who will see the shift first and seek more? Because you can't cheat destiny. You think you're the only one in the union who feels it's off? Nah, you're just the only one willing to accept it. The other is just pretending to avoid being alone, which means you're the one who has to bring it to a divine halt. The words hit him like an arrow, not just through the heart, but through the memory of every fight they ever had. Every time she called him clingy, every time he swallowed his gut feelings to keep the peace. They had broken up 100 times, but the habit kept reeling them back in. The comfort of the familiar, the hope that maybe this time will be different. They had a child, a home, at one point, love. He stared up at the framed photo on the wall. It was from her pregnancy photo shoot. They were wearing matching outfits. His hand cupped her belly. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. Their foreheads were touching, faces so close even light couldn't sneak between them. The romance bled from the picture, the kind of photo people repost with captions like, Black love is beautiful. But now, was it all a lie? Did she ever really love me? Is Rennie even mine? He hated himself for even thinking about it, but this was what Chantel had done to him and left him doubting everything, even the one person he would have died for without question. The pain pinned him to the mattress. He curled up on his side, clutching a pillow to his chest like it might give him some answer. And somewhere between rage, heartbreak, and exhaustion, Jante finally fell asleep. Still fully dressed, still listening, still searching, alone. Jante woke up before the sun rose, the faint glow of dawn creeping through the half-closed blinds. The podcast had long stopped playing, and the phone had fallen off the nightstand during the night. He didn't remember when he drifted off, only that the ache in his chest was the first thing he felt when his eyes opened. Chantel still hadn't called. No apology, no denial, no explanation, just silence. She must have tried to come home because she took her stuff off the front porch, even left her ring on the rocking chair. He seen it when he went to check on Rennie in the middle of the night. That morning, when he awoke, he sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his face. His knuckles were bruised and swollen from the wall he'd punched the night before. Jante moved throughout the apartment like a machine, collecting the last of Chantel's things. The forgotten pair of boots by the front door, the extra toothbrush in the bathroom, the drawer full of receipts and notes with hearts scribbled in purple ink that now felt performative and hollow. He dumped it all into a box and sealed it with tape and pushed it into the hallway. Rennie stirred in her bed, small feet kicking beneath her pink comforter. She mumbled something in her sleep and flipped over, hugging her bear close. Jante paused at the door, watching her breathe. She's what matters now. He made a list in his phone. Find daycare. Call Mally about the job opening. Cancel lease. Buy plane tickets. Move home. Home. Back to the city where he'd grown up in. The city where his mother still lived. Where his agent promised him writing opportunities. Where a Grand Lyric Theater was located. It made sense now. Too much noise and pain lingered in this home. Every room smelled of betrayal. He opened his laptop and started searching for daycare options near his childhood neighborhood. Rennie deserved a fresh start, too. A place where she didn't have to ask why mommy wasn't home or why daddy looked so tired all the time. The folder of Chantel's old photos was still open on the laptop. Lingerie, laughter, her and that man smiling like they'd never once struggled to love each other. Jante shut it click. He wasn't going to drown in this. He wouldn't let himself. He pulled out the one framed picture he kept by his bed, the one from when Rennie was born. Chantel was still in the hospital gown, exhausted but glowing. Jante cradled their newborn daughter in his arms, smiling like he'd been given the entire world. Maybe that part was real. Maybe it was enough. He put the picture in a box labeled Keep and made himself a promise. No more begging someone to stay. No more searching old phones and praying to be proven wrong. Just Rennie. Just healing. Just forward. By noon, the movers were booked. He'd leave in 2 weeks. Then he looked around his nearly empty apartment. Everything that mattered could fit in 3 boxes and one sleepy little girl's dreams. He picked up Rennie from her nap, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Daddy's taking us somewhere better. She stirred, looked up with heavy eyes, and smiled. Are we going to fly? Jante smiled. We're going to fly, baby. India had her hands full enough to distract her from the tense dinner she had with Greg a couple of weeks back. Between the full event calendar for the theater, her writing obligations as the lead writer on a hit television show, and the kids, she had barely had time to breathe. This morning, she alternated between the computer, her cell phone, and her iPad. She needed to assist Greg with shopping for the kids' back to school necessities, ensuring she purchased the required items. She had to approve the decor, staffing, and guest list for theater events, as well as review and adjust the budget. The iPad she now held played soothing meditation music to keep her grounded throughout the chaotic day. She found herself falling asleep at the table, her laptop still open and emails pouring in. She hadn't been able to catch her breath all day, and that was how she liked it. Her cell phone lay on the table, open to Greg's text thread. They were communicating about the kids. Truthfully, she had not thought of him. She intentionally avoided thinking about anything related to them. But she understood he didn't have that luxury with a 24 by 12 wedding picture of them nailed to the wall above their marital bed. She told him to get rid of it, but he refused. It seemed he either loved to torture himself or was in denial about the state of their marriage. Either way, he was stuck. She dozed off more than once and woke up 20 minutes past the time she should have left for the open mic night. She rushed around her apartment grabbing programs and devices, stuffing them into her leather briefcase while doing her makeup and getting dressed. She got to the car only to hear her dear 2012 Acura stalling. She turned the key more times than she liked to admit, only to hear the same sound. She would have to call an Uber instead. But once she opened the app, it gave her a 1 hour delay before any driver could arrive. She couldn't afford to be any later. So she made a call to the one person she knew she shouldn't call for this. Within 20 minutes, he was parked next to her dead Acura, blasting Kim with the windows down. She pranced over to the car, briefcase in front of her, embarrassment on her face as he inspected the Acura like it was a deformed horse. She stood quietly by the car, not knowing if she should even enter it. He sensed her hesitation and allowed her to work through it as he stepped out to look under the hood of her car. He wiggled through the coils and large parts like a skilled mechanic. Technical men were always her weakness. His muscles flexed as he took things apart and put them back together. Moments later, he looked up at her and said, "You'll need a new engine." As he closed the hood of her car and smoothly slid over to her, opening his passenger door, she stood there, contemplating. He gestured for her to step inside, politely bowed, and placed a gentle but firm hand on her back to encourage her to move. His eyes pulled her in, said it was okay, that they could handle whatever came next. He waited to close her door. That was different. No matter that she'd make them both late. He awaited her hesitation and made space for it. Once inside, he closed her door and they drove off to the theater. The drive was silent yet loud. She observed everything about him but said nothing. The way his muscles flexed as he worked the steering wheel, the way he exhaled smoothly at every red light, like he took the time to collect his thoughts, the smoothly controlled way he operated the huge pickup truck. No abrupt stops or rushed turns. Every move for him was seamless. He even glanced at her occasionally to confirm she was okay. With a raised brow and head tilt, she would answer with a slight bow of her head. She wasn't sure if it was the way he looked at her or the calm and gentle manner in which he operated his vehicle that made her crave his touch in this moment. She wanted him to handle her like he handled this huge pickup truck. Her thoughts were wandering wildly, and she lowered the window to slightly gather herself. Jante peeked over at her tense posture, briefcase clutched to her torso, both legs crossed, lips tense. He could tell she was nervous to be in such close proximity to him after the last time they met. He put on some smooth jazz to relax her. She had rolled the window down and had her face halfway out. Her locks whipped violently as the wind tried to grab them. The scent of her shampoo filled the car, vanilla and caramel with a hint of cocoa. The curled ends of her locks were grazing the middle of her back, and she slightly swayed to allow them to collect onto her shoulder. The way she shimmied to make them flow back onto her delicate shoulder made her coat drop slightly, and her dress strap was revealed. He noticed the smell coming off her skin, her hair, her hands. Noticed the smooth caramel matte complexion of her shoulder and the slight shimmy that made her skin shimmer under the car light. He approached a red light and exhaled to collect himself. Whenever he heard her grunt, which she did every time a car got too close, he would gaze at her, raise an eyebrow to confirm she was good. She answered with a slight bow of her head. He wanted to talk to her, but didn't know what to say. Maybe he could find the right words after the event, when they had time to comprehend the weight of this moment. They arrived outside the Grand Lyric Theater just as the sky shifted from dusk to ink. The building stood tall and romantic with amber lights pouring from its ornate windows. The laughter of creatives floating in and out like smoke. Jante stepped out and made his way to open India's door before she could reach it for herself. The moment he opened it, she jetted inside the theater and didn't look back, heels clicking faster than her heartbeat and her long coat flowing furiously behind her. She wasn't mad. She was turned on, and she had to get out of his face, fast. He stood outside watching her disappear into the soft light and velvet-draped interior. Inside, the familiar buzz of spoken word, stage lights, and scented candles offered a temporary balm to the tension still vibrating in her skin. Her colleagues waved at her from the front row, already mid-program. She nodded at them but didn't take her seat. She drifted to the back of the theater instead, near the door, unfocused, distracted. Her phone buzzed. She rolled her eyes and tucked the phone back into her bag without replying. But even as she focused on the mic, the new poet, the raw lines, the tremble in his voice, her thoughts were still in that truck. Still with Jante? Still on the way he exhaled at every red light. Still on the way he waited for her to move, to breathe, to feel safe. He was in the audience for quite some time. She opened her phone to check the performance list. He wasn't on it, but this was open mic night, and the poem was still pretty popular. As the night aged, poets went one by one, filling the air with longing and hope. Toward the end, Jante walks up to the stage, passes by her to get there, and his scent greeted her nostrils. That scent of his lingered longer than it should have. Once on stage, he is staring into her. This stare was deeper than basic eye contact, like he was pushing through all her immediate thoughts and demanding her attention, demanding space in her mind. India stood frozen in the same spot she'd been in since he stepped on stage. Clipboard pressed to her chest, one foot reclined on its heel, eyes fixed on him. Jante walked down from the stage, focused, his stride direct, heading straight toward her. A moment of silence simmered between them until India finally exhaled and asked, "How do you do that?" "Been doing it for years." "This is the second time I've seen you recite something, off the cuff, no pen, no phone notes, nothing?" she asked, wondering if this was something inspired by them, or if he was just that good. "How do you think I did it?" "I have no idea," she chuckled, and he joined her. The tension eased. She lowered the clipboard that had been glued to her all night and loosened her arms. Comfort was creeping in, or maybe his warmth was defrosting the part of her that was scared or hesitant. "Let me tell you over dinner," he said, calm, smooth, no nerves. Like he already knew she wouldn't say no. Like something in her face had already invited the offer. She looked around the Grand Lyric Theater for a reason to decline, but all she felt was a quiet, divine yes. "It's just dinner," she finally said. "Just dinner," he repeated, tapping her arm to bring her back to earth. flashing that huge, bright smile and giving her another hint of that rugged, sweet cologne that pulled her in deeper than she should have gone. It was like he could hear her overthinking, and she was, just not in the way she was used to. She stared into his eyes, and a slow smile spread across her lips. They arrived at the restaurant a little after 10. It was a small bohemian style diner just down the street from the theater. They walked there in a calm, easy silence, their footsteps echoing in sync. There was always this silence between them, like during the drive earlier that day and again in the moments after their last meeting nearly a year ago. A silence that felt shared, like they were thinking the same thoughts, like they were speaking to each other in ways the mouth never could. It was the first time India had experienced serene silence in the presence of someone else. I'm starving, Jante said, unrolling his napkin and scooting in. Me too, she replied, catching another whiff of that cologne and sipping her water quickly, trying to wash away the unclean thought pulling in the front of her mind. They both chuckled when they realized they'd ordered the same thing: grilled chicken club sandwich with melted mozzarella, grilled onions, and mushrooms, plus a side of barbecue sauce. While they waited, they lingered in light talk: jobs, kids, creatives they both knew and admired. But once the food was gone, the conversation deepened. Jante leaned in, the soft lamp above them casting a warm glow over his honey-toned skin and drawing out the hazel in his eyes. His muscular arm brushed hers slightly as he inhaled, like he was preparing to confess. India leaned forward, drawn into the moment as though it were written into her hopes, right behind something sacred. I like you, India, he said. His hand melted into hers. She didn't speak. She just nodded, and he understood. Still, he continued. I think this, he gestured between them, is bigger than anything I could put into words. Another nod. I'd love to see where this goes. They stared at each other, pulled by the same current, their eyes locked. Faces moved closer, lips met, breaths synced, hands lingered, thoughts raced. There was no plan to pull away until the waiter dropped off the check. If not for that, there might have been an invitation to go further. India glanced down at her wedding ring, shimmering under the streetlight pouring in through the window. Her vows, her family, her children. She pulled away before the waitress could even walk away. Grabbing her briefcase and coat, she ran out the door. Jante tossed down enough money to cover the bill, then ran after her. She stood on the sidewalk, pacing, heels tapping violently against the cement, breath pushing hard through her nostrils. He didn't approach her right away. He just watched. She was panicking. He raised his hands, signaling surrender. I know, he said softly. This is bad. This is wrong, she blurted out as she stomped in a rhythm that only panic could create. Then it won't happen again, he said calmly, but I won't apologize for it. She stopped pacing, looked the other way. Oh, he said that last time. I'm not sorry, and you shouldn't be either. She turned to him, eyes wide, intense. It only feels this intense because we're in complicated spaces in our lives. How can you be so sure? I read a book about it, she said, then burst into laughter, loud, sharp, almost manic. He stared at her, unsure if she was breaking or releasing. But after a moment, it hit him too, how absurd this all was, and he joined in. What's so funny? He asked, stepping closer. Everything's been horrible. I went out of my marriage. I asked God for a sign, and my car dies. I call my husband for a ride. He doesn't answer, never even calls me back. So I call you, and you show up. Then this happens. I don't even know what to think. He gently took her hand and got even closer. Maybe you're not supposed to think about it. Maybe you're supposed to fall into it. And she did. She let him hold her hand, and even held his in return. Let the moment swallow her whole. like she was a smooth piece of caramel in the mouth of a starving child. "You never even told me how you did it," she said, breathlessly. "I spoke from the heart. That's where all the verses come from anyway." "No notes?" she asked. "None needed," he said, his eyes on hers. "When it's felt, it's remembered." They didn't speak much after that, just held hands for a few quiet moments under the city's breath, street lights flickering like they too were deciding whether to stay on or not. Eventually, Jante walked her to the passenger side of his truck and opened the door. She stepped in quietly, settling her briefcase in her lap, unsure if the buzz in her chest was anxiety or something softer. He got in beside her, started the engine, and let the quiet ride carry them away. The silence was warm, familiar now, a place they both seemed to understand. When they pulled up in front of her apartment building, neither moved right away. "You good?" he finally asked, eyes still on the windshield. She nodded, hand already on the door handle. "I think so." He turned to face her. "I meant what I said tonight." She looked back at him, eyes softer than before. "I know." He leaned over, kissed her hand. Nothing dramatic, just enough to linger, and whispered, "Good night, India." "Good night, Jante." She got out slowly, turned once before reaching the door, and offered him a smile. Not one of invitation, but one of understanding. He watched her disappear into the building before exhaling deeply. By the time he pulled into his mother's driveway, the house was dark, except for the porch light she always left on for him. Inside, his daughter was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book in her lap, fast asleep. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and kissed her cheek. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, eyes heavy, mind not quite ready to rest. Meanwhile, India stepped into her apartment, dim, quiet, familiar. She poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let the silence wrap itself around her like a blanket. That silence followed her upstairs. It wrapped around her shoulders as she showered, slipped into bed, and stared at the ceiling. She was caught in the in between, between the man she married and the man who made her feel something again, between what felt wrong and what somehow felt more right than anything she'd ever known, between comfort and connection, obligation and desire. Greg had history, but Jante had presence, and presence was something Greg hadn't shown in years. India didn't want to blow up her life for a spark, but what if it wasn't just a spark? What if Jante was the match and she was finally ready to burn? By morning, her mind was no quieter. So she ran, not just to escape the guilt, but to survive the ache of staying stuck. And as her feet hit the pavement, the fog kissed her skin. She knew exactly where she needed to go. Not physically, but emotionally. She needed the divine route. The Divine Route was a podcast known for pulling back the veil on romantic crossroads. Its purpose? To help people figure out if their partner was a wrong turn or their final merge. Controversial, yes, but wildly addictive. Callers phoned in anonymously, their voices filtered, identities protected with fake names. And each week, the host delivered spiritual clarity with a tone so warm, it could make even heartbreak feel holy. India had listened faithfully since her separation from Greg. She often considered calling in herself to confess how meeting Jante had lit a fire inside her that burned brighter than anything she'd ever felt. How somewhere between shared laughter and accidental touches, she'd begun to suspect that Greg was not her final merge after all. She didn't want to admit it out loud. Not yet. On days like today, when the thoughts ran too wild and the temptation to end her marriage felt too real, India didn't reach for the podcast. She ran. Hard. The park near her apartment had become her sanctuary. Mornings here were blanketed in fog, and as the mist hung low over the trees, it cooled her body and quieted her soul. Birds chirped like they were greeting each other, fluttering from tree to tree. kissing petals and branches. The rhythm of her feet striking the pavement and the gentle sway of nature worked better than therapy. She had Tim's Higher on repeat. India wasn't the type who needed a giant playlist to keep going. One song, her song, was enough to push her further, dig deeper. I won't wait for you, she sang under her breath again and again, because she had waited 15 years. 15 years of holding space for a man who barely saw her, who loved her in fragments, who never returned to her fully. India had waited in vain, in hope, in quiet desperation, as so many women do. But she was done now. She stopped running for a moment, stepped to the side of the trail, and caught her breath. Her fingers tapped open Spotify. With one swipe, she was back on the divine route. She ran again. Her body ached. Her legs were fire, but she had to move. If she stopped, anxiety would sit on her chest and shake her until she broke. A caller named Leon was on the line. His voice was layered in a digital filter, but the pain in it was unmistakable. He spoke of heartbreak, how he found out his longtime girlfriend had been cheating, how she left and never looked back, not even for their daughter. She took her things and vanished. I always knew we were misaligned, he said, voice cracking, but the spark, it felt like home. And now I'm stuck, in love with a cold woman who never really loved me. She just wanted my body, and when I asked for more, she found someone else who'd give it to her. The host paused, then gently asked him to pick a number and a letter. Leon did. There was a long moment of silence as she ran it through the system. Then her voice returned, soft and firm. She's a wrong turn. She's felt it for months and decided to follow another flame. So the real question is, do you wait for a love that will only leave you again? We have a daughter, he whispered, and India felt her chest squeeze. I know, the host replied, but your final merge is already in connection with you. Her voice brightened slightly. She's everything you never had in a woman. Your puzzle piece, the balm to your scars, and she carries a light that can pull you from this darkness. India slowed down, transfixed. The host's voice lowered into something almost prophetic. Your see gave her heart to. Oh, but I is near. God is preparing her for you, Jay. So prepare yourself for her. Clean out the remnants of this wrong turn. Heal before you rejoin the divine route. Rest. Replenish. God will place you both in the same lane, and it's going to stir your soul. The line cut. India stopped in her tracks. A shiver crawled down her arms. Damn, she's good. Each week, people called back with stories proving the host's visions true, down to the names, dates, even cities. India sat down in the middle of the path, eyes closed, head tilted to the sky. Give me a sign, she whispered. And, as if summoned by her soul, a butterfly drifted down and landed on the bridge of her nose. She let out a startled breath, frozen in place. Just then, the host's voice echoed in her ears. Call us now if you want to know if you're stuck in a wrong turn or have settled into your final merge. The butterfly lifted off her skin and flew away. She didn't think. She just dialed. The line clicked. Then the host spoke. And her words sent a chill through India's entire being. You are stuck in a wrong turn, but God doesn't want you to find the road back just yet. There will be a collision, and He needs you there for now. There was a pause, a deep inhale. Then, I urge you not to turn around. Continue the road you've been driving. The divine route will make sense later. Goodbye. Click. Silence. Then, faintly, she heard the host whisper to her team. That was intense. That was the first time I envisioned a death. I need a minute. India's heart thudded. Her ears rang. She sat there completely still, legs trembling. A death? A collision? God needs me there? The wind picked up. Leaves rustled. And for the first time in a long time, India felt terrified. When the divine route detours, God needs me here. She had repeated the sentence every morning to herself as she greeted the sun on the balcony. She started spiking her morning tea. Nothing heavy, just a shot of liquor to take the edge off. She had chosen to go back to the home she and Greg shared for many years. Back to Greg, back to the routine, back to a house that felt cold. The call to the divine route had scared her. Something about the words collision, death, and God needs you there sounded too serious to ignore. So, when Greg came back around, tearful, changed, ready, she took it as divine instruction. She thought obedience would bring peace. But obedience without joy is its own kind of slow death. She smiled through family brunches, gulped the wine at date night dinners, but cried in the shower every night. Pretended she didn't flinch every time she passed a stage or heard someone freestyle. Greg tried, at least, in the way he knew how. He asked fewer questions, took her on more dates, even bought her a desk to start writing again. But he never saw her, not the way Jante did. And when she'd accidentally catch herself smiling too long at nothing, she knew it was because he had been thinking of her too. Jante, the man she never had, the man she always felt. They hadn't spoken since that night. But some souls don't require contact to stay in connection. And hers whispered his name in the quiet, especially on nights when her heart ached in places Greg never even touched. Jante had stayed true to his path. No late night texts, no checking her socials, no soft spots left for Chantel. After that divine route call, he felt released. She's your wrong turn, the host had said, and for once, he believed it before needing another heartbreak to prove it. He spent his weekends with Rennie, built routines around poetry and parenting. Healing wasn't loud, it was quiet, slow, and intentional. Then Chantel texted, I'll drop Rennie off around 2. Let's meet at the cafe, easier than the house. Seemed reasonable. Chantel had took a while, but eventually she started picking up Rennie, attempting to co-parent the best she could after leaving them for almost a year. Co-parenting was never going to be clean, but it had its rhythms. When Jante walked into the local bookstore cafe at 2:07, he expected to see Rennie, maybe coloring, maybe sipping cocoa, probably asking to stop for ice cream on the way. But it was just Chantel, sitting alone. No Rennie. She with your mom? He asked, cautiously, still standing. Chantel smiled, cool and familiar. No, I left her at home. I thought we could talk first. His expression hardened. That wasn't the agreement. I just needed a minute with you. She stood, smoothing down her blouse, stepping in like old times. He didn't budge. She reached for his hand. I miss you. Not just Rennie. You. Us. There is no us, Chantal. And don't use our daughter as a pawn to get me alone. She tilted her head, a pout forming. So you really feel nothing now? I feel peace. I'm not trading that for flashbacks and false hope. She moved closer anyway. chest almost touching his. Her perfume hit first. Sweet, seductive, calculated. I didn't come here to argue, she whispered. I just wanted to see if there's still something between us. Her hand slid to his chest. Her lips hovered far too close. He stepped back. Chantal. His voice was steady, unmoved. Her smile faded quickly, replaced by the bitterness he remembered too well. I don't know who you think you are now, but don't forget who loved you first. I'm not forgetting, he said. I'm just finally choosing myself. She blinked, grabbed her purse, and stormed past him without a word. And Jante stood still, heart racing, not with confusion, but with clarity. He wasn't shaken. He wasn't tempted. He had just passed the test. He once mistook Chantel's chaos for chemistry, but not anymore. A premonition of love. It had been months since India stepped foot inside the Grand Lyric Theater. This beautiful place that once felt like a sacred space for talent now only reminded her of the betrayal she continued to inflict on herself. She'd taken a long leave to digest everything she had buried deep just to stay married to Greg. After experiencing what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, she couldn't go back to merely being tolerated without losing herself again. So she stepped down from her position as creative director at the theater, regretfully. Greg tried to hide his happiness, but he reveled in her decision. He offered fake apologies and gentle sentiments like, I know this is hard for you, followed by more date nights and midnight talks meant to ease the ache. He thought that would fix it. It didn't. India walked into the theater in pieces. Her hair was done, nails and makeup near perfect, and her outfit was a work of art, but her soul was in shambles. She missed being at the head of it all, directing, planning, creating, but she knew that part of her life was over. So she inhaled regret and exhaled acceptance as she took her seat beside one of her former managers to enjoy the evening's play. The actors moved effortlessly on stage, every line and note delivered with crisp precision, pulling reactions from the audience like puppet strings. India laughed at moments, but she drifted in and out of her thoughts. How have you been? Her former employee asked, leaning over to touch her leg with genuine concern. India wanted to be honest, to admit she felt barely there, but she smiled and nodded. Fine, thank you, she replied, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. He told me to tell you hi, her colleague said. India's spine straightened instantly. Who? She asked, pretending not to know. Jante, she whispered. I saw him at the last event. We'll talk after the show. India's pulse quickened. Anxiety, excitement, anticipation, all tangled in a divine second. She didn't hear another word of the play. Her mind was already at that last event. She had only heard bits and pieces, rumors, half truths, fragments from mutual acquaintances, but now it seemed she was about to hear it all. When the show ended, she and Shannon parted for a while. Nearly an hour later, they met again in the emptying lobby. Shannon's expression said everything. Lips pressed tight, head tilted, hands shoved deep in her pockets. Before I start running my mouth, she said carefully, did you even hear anything about it? I heard some things, India said softly. Only bits and pieces. I've never seen him like that before, Shannon said. He's always so smooth, so prepared. But that night, he fumbled almost every word in his piece. Does anybody know what happened? India asked, her voice low but weighted with concern. Shannon glanced around, then leaned closer until their shoulders almost touched. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He started acting off when I told him you weren't working here anymore. I can't be sure, but There was a shift, and I think the piece he read that night was meant for you. Her heart sank deep in the pit of her regret. Jesus, she exhaled, guilt and longing clashing in her chest. Talk to him, Shannon urged gently. It's not that he did anything wrong, India said. It's me. My life is a mess, and I can't afford more confusion. Shannon's gaze sharpened. India, I've seen confusion before, and it's not with him. It's in your marriage. India sighed. Maybe, but revisiting this connection right now would push me in a direction I'm not ready for. Shannon nodded, then took out her phone. Here, she said, sending a link. The Divine Route is doing a live event in 2 weeks. I know you already called in once, but you can never have too much clarity. She placed a hand on India's shoulder before walking away. India stared at the notification glowing on her screen, the event link. Her stomach fluttered with nerves as her fingers hovered over the sign up button. Then, finally, she pressed it. A quiet alignment. Weeks had passed since that tense cafe meeting, and Jante had thrown himself into writing and raising Rennie with steady hand. He kept his distance from Chantel's chaos, pouring his restless energy into verses and rhymes instead, especially after that humiliating night at the Grand Lyric Theater a few months back. He'd been fresh out of his breakup with Chantel and secretly excited at the chance to see India at the event that evening. She was easy to talk to, and her energy always steadied him, but she didn't show. When he later heard she had resigned from her position, he nearly lost his footing, wondering if he had anything to do with it. Still, he got on stage, scanning the crowd for her face, and when he didn't find it, every word of his poem stumbled. That night, Jante realized he was more invested in their connection than he had ever allowed himself to believe. Now, sitting in a cafe on the corner near his new apartment, Jante wrote quietly as he waited for Rennie to get out of school. His daily ritual of self-care. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon hung in the air as he scribbled verse after verse in his leather journal, trying to translate the ache of distance into something beautiful. A notification flashed on his phone. A message from a friend with the link. The Divine Route Live. Sign up now. He stared at it for a long moment. He had spoken to the host once before, right after the devastation with Chantel. The call had given him clarity, confirmation that Chantel was a wrong turn, and not his final merge. The host even mentioned that his true connection was already in his orbit. He wanted to believe that connection was India, but she was married. And after ending a 12-year relationship, he knew better than to cling too tightly to the idea of fate. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. He filled out the sign up form anyway, seeking clarity more than answers. Just as he hit submit, his phone buzzed again. Maya, an old friend and fellow poet, someone who knew both his story and India's. Hey, Jante, I'm putting together a new project, and I think you and India could make one hell of a team. You two should meet up to talk about it. How's Thursday? Jante stared at the screen, a small spark flickering behind his tired eyes. India. Her name alone carried the weight of everything unresolved, complicated, sacred. Maya's message felt like a lifeline tossed across an endless space. He typed back simply, sounds great. Across town, India stared at her own phone, fingers hovering above the same text. She bit her lip, her pulse quickening. Then she typed, I'm in. Neither knew what this collaboration would awaken, but both felt it. The quiet pull of something new, a chance to create, to heal, to align. Sacred energy. He saw her pull into the theater parking lot, a brand new truck roaring, sounding far healthier than the one he'd pronounced dead before the divine dinner months ago. India stepped out, tucking a lock behind her ear as she murmured to herself. He could tell she was overthinking. She always did when she was nervous. But he didn't mind. He admired the soft parting of her lips, the grace of her hand gestures, the silky tone of her voice as she tried to self soothe. She was nervous to see him again. Truthfully, he was nervous too. He stayed hidden, sitting quietly until she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Everything will be fine, India." He chuckled under his breath, charmed by the innocence in her self talk. He waited a few more minutes before going inside. For a moment, he almost backed out, started the engine, buckled his seatbelt, but the thought of how badly his last performance had gone stopped him. Maybe this meeting could bring some inspiration, even if it was temporary. It was worth it. Inside, the studio was quiet except for the soft hum of a space heater and the faint scratch of a pen on paper. India sat at one end of a worn wooden table, notebook open but untouched, her eyes tracing the words Jante had just read aloud. He stood by the window, voice low and steady, weaving lines that felt both raw and hopeful. For a moment, the room held its breath. India cleared her throat and softly offered her own verse, a reflection, a response. Her voice was cautious, hesitant, but every word hung between them like a sacred thread. The tension in the room began to shift, thawing into something fragile but alive. Jante smiled, his eyes brightening. He picked up the rhythm again, adding flourishes that lifted her lines higher, coloring them with new light. Minutes blurred into hours. Their verses began to move together, finishing each other's thoughts, sparking images neither could have imagined alone. It was effortless, natural, sacred. At the door, Maya leaned quietly against the frame, watching. She saw how their energy blended, how their sparks collided and bloomed into something electric. Later, she pulled them aside, eyes shining. "You two don't see it yet, do you? The way you move together, finishing lines, feeding off each other's rhythm, is like you're made for this. This isn't just poetry," she said, smiling softly. "It's divine. You're not just creating art, you're elevating each other." India and Jante exchanged a glance, part surprise, part something unspoken. Maybe she was right. Maybe this collaboration wasn't just creative. Maybe it was the beginning of something sacred, slow, and undeniable. First, performance. The night of their debut as a duo arrived like a whispered promise. The small venue buzzed with anticipation. A tight knit crowd gathered in the dim light of exposed bowls and vintage posters. India and Jante stood side by side behind the mic, their notebooks clasped in hand, hearts pounding in sync. The air between them was electric but gentle, as if the universe itself held its breath. They began with the piece born from their studio sessions, a seamless blend of their voices, their stories intertwined. Their words rolled over the crowd like waves, each verse a call and response, a conversation spoken in rhythm and rhyme. When they finished, the applause was thunderous, not just for the poetry, but for the palpable connection they shared. Their eyes met, smiles blooming, a quiet acknowledgement of what they'd found in each other's responses. The breaking point. India and Jante sat in the loudest silence known since the day the earth was created, and only God Himself existed. Maya had been chatting them up about possibilities, a tour, publishing deal, exposure. Jante seemed excited by it all. India, not so much. He could tell. She spent most of the meeting biting her lip and tapping her foot. Her energy was restless, anxious, like she was trying to outrun her own thoughts. "This sounds like a lot," she finally said, wringing her hands as she paced back and forth, her heels striking the hardwood floor sharply. What's wrong with having a lot? Jante asked, his tone calm but probing. Don't you think you deserve this? She ignored him. His voice alone was a contradiction, one she enjoyed but refused to indulge in. This is a great opportunity, India, he continued, leaning forward. One we both deserve. Let's just weigh the pros and cons before writing it off, yeah? We? She snapped, stopping mid-pace. We are a team, he replied, eyebrows arched in frustration. That means we have to consider each other's position before refusing or accepting anything. I don't need you to tell me how to be an adult. Thank you, she shot back, voice tight. Jante exhaled hard, crossed one leg over the other, and tossed his locks back to calm himself. He didn't want to argue. Not anymore. He'd done enough of that with Chantel. But something about this moment, about her, was triggering. Okay, okay. Maya finally stepped in, like a referee calling time. We've got some time before the contract needs to be signed. No decisions today. But before the end of the month, we need clarity. Just remember, this is a team decision, but the Grand Lyric's reputation is on the line here too. India sank back into her seat, the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. It's not just our careers, India, Jante said, his voice softening but still firm. It's the staff, the theater owners, the poets who count on these events for work. That's a lot of people to disappoint. I still have to do what's best for me and my family, she replied coldly. And everyone else can just suffer, right? He snapped. Your hostility is directed at the wrong person, she warned. Maybe, he said, standing and grabbing his coat. Or maybe it's directed at the right one. No, she said, rising too. I don't have to put up with this. But you put up with a partner who refuses to see you, he fired back. Who makes you feel guilty for your talent? Who punishes you for being bigger than him? And yet you stay. Why is this moment any different? Maya covered her face with the magazine, sinking into her chair. She wanted no parts of this. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. India's voice sharpened, her tone cold and precise. Not everyone whose relationship is hard needs to quit. I'm doing the right thing, something Chantel should have done. But I see there's a side of you most people don't experience, one that shows up when you don't get what you want. Maybe you should take some of the blame for why she went looking for love elsewhere. Her words hit him square in the chest. The room fell silent. Tempers peaked. They both stormed out. No resolution, no plan, no promise to reconnect. Just two broken souls retreating to lick the wounds. Jante sped off the lot. India stomped to her trunk, laying her head on the steering wheel as she screamed the nastiest words she could muster into the empty air. This was the ache of two souls bound and burning, wanting better for each other, but unable to see it without tearing themselves apart. Restless nights. Jante couldn't sleep. His heart felt heavy enough to weigh down his entire chest, the ache making breathing damn near impossible. Eating felt like a chore, and his legs were too heavy to walk on. He spent his days pushing through work, errands, playtime with Rennie. But when night came, he'd pull the blanket over his head and drift off into a scrolling coma on his phone. He, India, and Maya hadn't spoken since that night. Maya had expressed her disappointment about the petty back and forth in a group text, but neither he nor India replied. He was angry, triggered, affected. There was something about India, her presence, her calm, her bright spirit, that set her apart from most. But that day, her energy had been frantic, chaotic, much like Chantel's. He didn't know how to handle it without slipping into old habits. Defensiveness, retreat, all the shadow work, all the therapy, gone in an instant. He hated the way it ended, the way her hurt mirrored his, and he couldn't tell if his frustration came from her hesitation to accept the opportunity or from her decision to quit the Grand Lyric altogether. His mind had been a storm ever since, his heart heavy with grief. not just from the argument, but from all the words left unsaid between them. He couldn't explain what he felt for India, or the divine energy that always seemed to hum in the air when they were near, but he knew he longed to explore it, even if he had to give her the space to choose her own path. That night he sat up in bed, the glow of his phone screen painting his face blue. He'd been stuck on a single phrase ever since that dinner, the last time he saw her before learning she'd resigned. That's us. Those two words circled his mind like a mantra. He whispered them aloud, testing their weight. That's us. That's us. That's us. But it felt wrong to type. He needed to feel the words, to shape them by hand. He reached for his worn journal in the nightstand, flipping to a blank page, pen in hand. He started to write, leaving wide, open spaces between verses where the words hadn't yet arrived. All the while, he kept reciting softly, "That's us," with a rhythm that pulsed through him like a heartbeat. Could this be a poem forming itself, or a connection finding its language? Across town, India couldn't sleep either. Her anxiety was alive in her legs, bouncing, twitching against the mattress. She ran her fingers through her locks again and again. She and Jante had felt sacred before that fight. But the argument, it shook something. He was triggered, sure, but she refused to shoulder all the blame. She'd made the right decision for her family, the one he'd make for his. Greg lay next to her, snoring softly, one arm sprawled across the bed. Every now and then he'd reach for her leg and hold it still, his way of asking her to stop fidgeting. But he never once asked why she couldn't be still. She couldn't lie there another minute. Quietly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked toward the balcony. Her head hung low, eyes lower. When she opened the glass door, the night air met her like a soft, familiar friend. The wind kissed her cheek as she stepped outside, easing into the chair and crossing her legs. Above her, the moon and the stars seemed so content. Like even if God had written them apart, they'd still find a way to meet again on another planet. Like the color green on a leaf or wood on a tree, the softness of a lover's lips, the curve of a woman's hips. India felt it then, that familiar creative stirring, the one that always showed up right in the middle of her anxious moment. Her right hand tingled, and the words began to form in her mind before she could stop them. She grabbed her balcony journal and began writing frantically, skipping lines whenever the words failed to come fast enough. The moon and the stars seemed so content, like even if God had written them apart, they would have found each other anyway. Like the color green on a leaf, or wood on a tree, the softness of a lover's lips, and the curve of a woman's hips. By the time she finished, her eyelids grew heavy. She dropped her head onto the table, and for the first time in days, she slept like a baby. The collision. Jante and India awoke the next morning filled with panic and fear. The news anchor sat outside the Velvet Room Event Center, the location where the Divine Route Live had taken place. Apparently, a shooting occurred this evening during a live event for a very controversial podcast, one that looks into the futures of couples and tells them if they're right or wrong for each other. 6 couples were involved in a violent exchange and 2 people were shot. One is severely injured, the other pronounced dead at the scene. Sources tell us the event is still taking place, but with tightened security measures and background checks for all participants. The host appeared on screen, visibly shaken, wearing an oversized coat that seemed to belong to the tall man beside her, a broad-shouldered figure with a deadly calm expression. "This is the first time we've ever had a shooting at one of our events, let alone a death," she said, voice trembling. "Our hearts and prayers are with the family of the woman who was shot, and we will make sure this never happens again." As she spoke, Security gently guided her away from the microphone and back inside the building. India stood frozen in front of the TV. Can you believe this? She said to Greg as she poured the milk for their son and spread jam on their daughter's toast. Yeah, that's pretty messy, Greg replied without looking up, fingers flying across his phone, probably sending last night's sales numbers to his manager. Messy? A woman died, Greg. People are saying she might have been pregnant, India said, her voice breaking. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you play in people's relationships, Greg muttered. The host is lucky she didn't get hurt. India flinched at the callousness of his words. She's just doing her job, Greg. That's cold, even for you. That was his wife, India. That's not a game for most men. She played with fire and got burned. Honestly, she should cancel the whole thing, but she's still going even after a death. Shows you what her motivation is. Money. India slammed the knife down on the counter. That's so mean, Greg. She stomped out of the kitchen, heels pounding against the hardwood, but Greg followed her, shoving his phone into his pocket. Are you planning to go to that live event? Is that why you're so worked up? India grabbed a shirt from the bed and started folding it, again and again, trying to keep her shaking hands busy. She was terrible at hiding things, and Greg knew that better than anyone. I just want clarity, she said quietly, eyes fixed on her shoes, one leg bouncing with nervous energy. Greg sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling like a man absorbing a blow. You refuse to make this easy for me, he said bitterly, gripping the bedpost. You haven't exactly been the perfect partner yourself, dear, she snapped back. He slammed his hand down on the mattress. But I tried. I did all that stupid stuff you asked for. Dinners, love texts, even bought you that damn desk to show you I support your writing. What have you done, India? Have you ever sacrificed for us? Oh, don't start. You did all of that after I left, not before. And I spent 15 years in a marriage with a man who thinks creatives are just hippies dressed like Harry Potter. Don't tell me about sacrifice, Greg. I begged you to come to countless open mics, and I quit the role of a lifetime just to make you feel like a man. So stop the pity party. His face darkened. You're in love with him. Oh, God, she shouted, rolling her eyes as she stormed toward the door. This back and forth exhausted her. Pretending things were fine had been their coping mechanism for years. Fake smiles to ease the ache of a dying marriage. But this argument felt different. It was final, like the moment before glass shatters. India busied herself again, finishing breakfast, cleaning the kitchen, prepping her bag for a meeting she'd almost forgotten about. Anything to escape the heaviness pressing down on her chest. She expected Greg to return, to keep arguing, to demand another round of explanations, but he didn't. He was quiet, too quiet. And in that stillness, something deep inside India began to stir, an unease she couldn't yet name. India finished rinsing the last dish and glanced toward the hallway. Still no sound. Not the creak of his footsteps. Not the usual impatient sigh he gave before calling her name. Just silence. She dried her hands, half annoyed, half worried, and walked toward the bedroom. Greg? She called softly at first. No answer. Her stomach tightened. The bedroom door was still halfway open, a sliver of morning light cutting across the carpet. When she pushed it open, the air changed. Heavier, colder. Greg sat slumped on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed against his chest. His phone was on the floor beside him. The screen cracked. Greg? She repeated, louder now, crossing the room in seconds. His face was pale, beads of sweat glistening along his forehead. He tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, strained. Then, before she could reach him, he crumpled sideways, body jerking once, then still. Greg! She screamed, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him. Her voice cracked into panic. She shouted for their daughter. Call 911, she shouted. Now, Sesame, go! Her hands trembled as she held him, whispering prayers and fragments of comfort that blurred together. Just a little longer. Just breathe, baby. I got you. But her voice was shaking. Her tears hit his shirt like raindrops, staining the blue cotton as his chest heaved beneath her hands. The sirens came fast, but not fast enough. When the paramedics burst through the doors, India's knees gave out. She stumbled backwards, sobbing as they moved in. One kneeling, one checking his pulse, another shouting for the defibrillator. What happened? One asked. I don't know. We were just talking and then he got quiet. Ma'am, step back, please. Another said gently, guiding her toward the wall. She clung to the doorway, refusing to blink, afraid that if she did, he'd disappear completely. They lifted him onto the stretcher, his head lolled to the side. His eyes, half open, looked empty, distant, already gone somewhere she couldn't reach. Greg! She cried as they wheeled him away, her own voice echoing down the hallway like it belonged to someone else. And just like that, her entire world, her past, her guilt, her unfinished love, collided into one unbearable sentence. The collapse. Backstage at the Grand Lyric Theater, Jante and Maya waited. The list of acts was getting shorter and shorter, their turn creeping closer with every minute. Jante called India 10 times, texted even more. Nothing. I know she was upset, Maya said, glancing at the clock, but it's not like her to just not show up. I've learned, Jante muttered, shaking his head. You don't really know what someone's capable of until they do it. This isn't her, Jante. I promise there's a reason. Maybe an emergency. It doesn't matter. He cut her off. We only get paid if we both show up. I booked a sitter. Now I have to pull from my emergency fund to pay her. I'm so sorry, Maya whispered, resting a hand on his shoulder. I knew this would happen, he said bitterly, but I got my hopes up anyway, and now we're stuck. No out. So I'm done. I quit. Please don't, Maya pleaded. She'll call. I know she will. When she does, he said, slipping on his coat, tell her I'm out. For good. He walked off before Maya could stop him. The ride home was silent, but loud in his mind. His thoughts spun, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He'd wanted so badly to apologize, to tell her that the man who snapped at her wasn't him, at least not the side of him he wanted her to see. The poem they'd written together was gold. Performing it with her always felt like an intimate exchange, filling each other's cup without ever touching. A divine rhythm, a love language spoken in verse. He never felt so connected to a woman without sex, and maybe that's what made it hurt more. Now, it was over. If he could have pushed past the argument, maybe she could have too. He thought they understood each other, but maybe that was wishful thinking. He pulled into the driveway of his small, cozy one-bedroom home, the one he shared with Rennie, and sat there in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart heavy, eyes burning, angry, disappointed, drained. Part 4. 1 year later. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. India sat on the edge of her bed wrapped in a robe that still smelled faintly of Greg's cologne. The silence pressed against her chest, filling every corner of the room where his voice used to live. The walls seemed to hum with ghosts, echoes of arguments, laughter, apologies that came too late, and love that didn't know how to stay. It had been a year since Greg died. A year since she found herself kneeling beside him on that bedroom floor, pleading with a God she barely recognized to let him breathe again. A year since the guilt took root in her bones and she refused to leave. Every day she replayed their last argument, the way his face softened before it went still, the words she didn't say, the ones she wished she hadn't. Sometimes she whispered them into the night, hoping maybe the universe would send them where he'd gone. But no amount of confession brought her peace. The grief was a shapeshifter. Quiet one day, cruel the next. Some days she woke up and almost forgot. Then she'd roll over and see the empty pillow beside her and remember everything she lost and everything she never gave back. She felt like she'd failed everyone. Greg for not loving him enough when he needed her most. Jante and Maya for walking away when they needed her to show up. Even herself for not knowing how to live with the pieces that were left. Her phone still held unread messages from Maya, old ones. Thinking of you. We're worried. Please call. India never did. Every time she tried, guilt wrapped its hand around her throat and squeezed until the words died inside her. Because how could she explain that she didn't feel worthy of healing? How could she admit that a part of her still wanted Jante after her husband's death without sounding monstrous? How could she want peace when she'd been the storm? So she stayed alone. She cooked in silence, slept in silence, wrote in silence. Even her tears fell quietly now, polite, contained, almost disciplined. Sometimes she imagined Greg's voice in the stillness, calm, forgiving, like he finally understood everything she couldn't say while he was alive. Other times, she imagined Jante, that steady tone that used to ground her, that she now missed like oxygen. But she said nothing, did nothing, just breathed through the ache and tried to convince herself that this was what she deserved, a life of unfinished sentences and unspoken apologies. But maybe some love stories end not with goodbye, but with silence. Mirror verses. Time passed in fragments for both of them. A year had gone by, but the ache lived like a tenant neither could evict. Jante still woke up before dawn, sitting at his small wooden desk by the window with a cup of black coffee beside him. The house would be silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the even softer breathing of his daughter, Rennie, asleep down the hall. He always told himself he'd write something new, something bright, something home. But every time he picked up his pen, the words curved back toward her. It wasn't on purpose. It was something deeper, something his spirit couldn't unlearn. He wrote about longing, about second chances, about the kind of silence that still hums like music. And every poem ended the same, half finished. One line left open, one thought suspended in midair. He couldn't explain why. He just knew he wasn't supposed to finish it. Across town, India did the same. Every night she sat on her balcony wrapped in a shawl and surrounded by flickering candles. The soft hum of the city filled the air as she scribbled verse after verse in her journal about guilt, forgiveness, and the weight of unfinished love. Her words were fragile, but they bled truth. Yet, just like him, she stopped short every time. She'd write 3, maybe 4 lines, then pause mid sentence, like she was waiting for something or someone to answer. I keep leaving empty space, India confessed in her journal, because maybe that's where he lives now, in the pauses I can't fill. She didn't know that on the same night, in a different corner of the city, Jante had written, some lines aren't meant to be finished alone. Maybe the silence between them is her. If either of them had seen the other's words, they would have realized it immediately. They were writing the same poem, different verses, same rhythm, different pain, same pose. Their connection, that divine current that first sparked on the Grand Lyric stage, hadn't ended. It had only shifted forms. Now it spoke through ink, through the hum of midnight thoughts, through silence that still felt shared. On her loneliest nights, India would whisper lines to herself that felt like prayers. Sometimes she imagined him hearing them wherever he was, like the words might travel on wind. She told herself it was ridiculous, but every now and then the air around her balcony felt still, charged, and she swore she could feel him listening. Jante felt it too. There were nights he'd look up from his journal, certain someone had just whispered his name. Not the way people say it normally, but softly, with familiarity, the way she did. He'd close his eyes and breathe deep, trying not to give the thought power, but the truth sat quietly behind his denial. Even separated by miles, grief, and guilt, they were still writing toward each other, unaware that word by word, line by line, their separate poems were becoming one. That's Us was already been written, just not by one hand. It was a duet neither of them had rehearsed, but both had somehow knew by heart. The Call to Come Home. Maya called Jante out of the blue. It had been a whole year since he'd heard from her. He wasn't ready to face the situation. Not her, not India, not the ghost of what could have been. He'd picked up on India's indecisiveness before, and it frightened him. She was fine when she was centered, grounded, but when her anxiety took hold, she shut down, and that made it dangerous for him to care. He assumed Maya was calling to talk about her, maybe to convince him to reach out again, but he had been healing, or at least trying to, and he didn't want to be pulled back into anything uncertain. He ignored the call and kept doing his grocery shopping, filling his cart with ingredients for Thanksgiving dinner. Just him and Rennie this year. Peaceful, predictable, quiet. Almost an hour later, he and Rennie pulled into the driveway, arms full of grocery bags. As they unloaded, a familiar voice called out, "So you're ignoring my calls now?" Maya. She was leaning against her car, arms folded, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Before he could reply, she followed him into the house, hugging Rennie on her way in. "We go back too far for that, Tay," she said, using the nickname only his closest friends ever did. "This is my life now, Maya," he said, half defensive, half defeated. "I can't afford to be thrown off track for someone who doesn't know what they want. I've got a new job. I've been writing, healing. I shouldn't risk this right now. I can't risk this right now." His voice dropped on that last part, heavy, as if even saying her name carried too much weight. Maya slipped off her coat and hat, setting her purse on the table. Then she gave him that look, the one that always came right before she said something she knew might cross the line. "You have feelings for her," she said flatly, tracing her fingers along the edge of the wooden table like she was drawing a map for him to follow back to himself. "Give her a chance to fix this." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Before that mess with Chantel, I probably would have. But now, I realize I have to do what's best for me. Always." "Don't be that guy, Jante," she said, her tone firm but laced with care. "The one whose heart turns so hard that love can't find its way back in? The one who lets one bad apple spoil every sweet one waiting for you to taste it." Her voice cracked a little. She wasn't just talking about him anymore. "I'm doing what's best for me," he said quietly, like she said she was doing for her. Maya sighed, shaking her head. "You wrote that poem for her. You wrote that poem because you felt her. The drained spirit she carried, the ache that dulled her shine. You saw it, Tay. You felt it, and you wanted to lift it. What changed? You see her as human now? As flawed?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Don't throw her away, Jante," she said finally, voice soft but firm. "You'll regret it if you do. Connections like that, real alignment, don't happen twice. You think you can let it go, but you'll spend the rest of your life searching for something that already found you. Don't let pride make you miss your merge." Her eyes glistened. "Don't be like me and Oscar." The room went quiet. He understood the weight of what she just admitted. Maya brushed a tear from her cheek, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. "By the way," she said, pausing just long enough to look back at him, "they're doing the Grand Lyric Anniversary Showcase next week. They're bringing back the best performers for the last 5 years. You should be there." She left without waiting for a reply. Jante stood there in the silence, Maya's words still heavy in the air. He looked over at Rennie, humming softly as she colored, her feet swinging under the table. That sound, her calm, anchored him, even as his chest tightened. He rubbed his palms together, staring down at them. The same hands that had held loved and lost it. The same hands that had written about healing but still shook when he thought of India. He didn't know what scared him more, the idea of reaching for her again or the chance that she'd pull away. He'd been through that before. The effort, the hope, and the crash. And yet, what he felt with her didn't fit inside fear. It was bigger, softer, real. Maybe Maya was right about him, about the way he gets in his own way. He exhaled, pressing a hand to his chest, steadying the ache that always seemed to linger there. He wasn't ready to chase her, but he was tired of running from what scared him. And for the first time, in a long time, he just let himself sit in that truth. Quiet, unsure, but honest. The soft surrender. India had to dig deep into herself to find the strength to do this. Maya had invited her to a showcase at the Grand Lyric Theater, and though she hesitated at first, she knew she owed him, Jante, an apology and an explanation. She had simply vanished after Greg's death, disappeared into grief so heavy that it left her hollow. That wasn't who she was. She'd always prided herself on being steady and reliable, the one who showed up. But when Greg died, a piece of her faith and love died too. How could she face someone like Jante, someone who saw her so clearly, when she no longer recognized herself? The week leading up to the event was slow and sacred. India tried to rebuild pieces of her courage, one small ritual at a time. She wrote in her journal every morning, spelling out everything she'd been too afraid to say aloud. She walked for hours through the winding paths of her neighborhood, the sound of her boots tapping against the pavement, grounding her in something like rhythm again. She cleaned her apartment, organized her closets, and folded old memories like fragile linens. Things she wasn't ready to throw away but couldn't bear to touch anymore. Every space she cleared, every corner she dusted, made room for air to return to her lungs. Maya had been patient but persistent. She checked in every day, never letting India sink too far into her silence. When India finally confessed the full truth, the guilt, the confusion, the love she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel, Maya listened quietly, then said what no one else had the courage to say. You feel guilty, India, but you and Greg were never good together. That's what makes it worse. Hiding from what's meant for you won't make the guilt go away. You'll just end up hurting yourself and Jante, trying to keep a promise you already outgrew. India didn't respond right away. The words sat heavy in her stomach, uncomfortable but true. Maya continued softly. You can't punish yourself forever for surviving. You loved Greg the best way you could, and when that love changed, it wasn't wrong. It was human. That night, India couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, eyes fixed on the stretch of sky above her building. The stars looked dim, as if even they were tired of being wished upon. She whispered into the stillness, her voice cracking just enough to let the truth escape. Do I even deserve to love again? The question lingered, caught between fear and confession. For months, she had carried the belief that Greg's death was her punishment, that maybe, by wanting more, she had somehow summoned loss. But the longer she sat there, the more that belief began to loosen its grip. Because deep down, she knew the ache wasn't about punishment. It was about longing. Jante hadn't asked for anything from her. He hadn't demanded love or promises. He simply saw her without pretense, without performance. And that alone terrified her. Because being seen meant she could no longer hide behind guilt. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart still beating. Slow, steady, stubborn. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to quiet it. Maybe she wasn't ready to love again. Maybe she still had miles to walk before she could say those words without trembling. But she could admit this much. What she shared with Jante was real, sacred, rare. And even if she wasn't ready to step into it now, she didn't have to run from it anymore. As dawn began to creep through the window, India closed her journal and whispered softly to herself, half prayer, half promise. When love comes again, I won't hide. They arrived. She sat in the car, nervously wringing her hands and biting her lip. A habit she could never break, especially when she was about to do something she dreamed about and feared all at once. This moment had been circling her for months, maybe even years. She knew it had to happen. The apology, the conversation, the collision of everything left unsaid. Still, her pulse danced like a drum line in her throat. She kept telling herself that if he agreed to come, that meant he was willing to listen. Maybe not ready to forgive, but at least open to hearing her out. She wasn't sure which scared her more, the chance that he might still be angry or the possibility he wasn't. As she looked up at the glowing marquee, Grand Lyric Theater 10-year anniversary showcase, her chest loosened just enough to let in air. The building shimmered like memory itself, gold lights reflecting off glass doors, velvet drapes spilling warmth into the lobby, and that familiar hum of anticipation that always filled the space before a show. This theater had held her joy once, and her heartbreak too. Yet, tonight, it felt different, like maybe it was holding space for something sacred to return. She smiled for the first time in weeks. It was small, trembling, but real. Grabbing her bag, she inhaled deeply and whispered, "You're here now. That's enough." And with that, she stepped out of the car, her heels tapping against the pavement like soft declarations of courage, carrying her toward the building that once felt like home. He sat in his truck outside the same theater, tapping the steering wheel to an old Jackson 5 song that played softly through the speakers. It had been a year, a full year, since he'd last seen her, and still, the thought of her had a way of sneaking into every verse he wrote. He wasn't sure why he agreed to this. Maya said it would be good for him. Closure, she called it, but closure had never been his strong suit. He'd rather write through it, bleed through it, than face it. He stared out the windshield, watching the crowd filter through the double doors, and wondered what she'd look like now. Would her smile still tremble before it bloomed? Would her eyes still search for safety before settling on his? He sighed, cutting the engine. His reflection in the glass looked older, steadier, maybe. But the moment his mind said her name, he was back in that space between almost and ain't. What do I even say? He muttered. What could I say that she doesn't already know? Still, he got out. The night air was sharp, grounding. He walked toward the entrance, nodding to a few familiar faces, and handed his jacket to a crew member before heading backstage. The merge. The air buzzed with sound checks and nervous chatter. India stood near the dressing mirrors, adjusting her mic and steadying her breath, her reflection flickering under the soft bulbs. The door behind her creaked. She turned and froze. Jante stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The noise of the backstage world dulled to a low hum. Her throat tightened, words catching somewhere between apology and relief. He gave a faint nod, not cold, not distant, just present. A small, unspoken truce passed between them in that quiet space. From down the hall, the stage manager called out, "You two are up next." India blinked, heart hammering. Jante took a few steps forward, close enough for her to catch the faint trace of his cologne. Familiar, grounding, disarming. He tilted his head slightly, eyes steady on hers. You ready? He asked. Her lips parted, breath unsteady. Not really, she admitted. He gave a soft, crooked smile, the kind that always made her forget to guard herself. Then we'll improvise. And just like that, they both turned toward the light spilling from the stage curtain, two halves of a story finally walking back into the same scene. The Grand Lyric Theater was packed, every seat filled, every breath expectant. India stood backstage, notebook in hand, trying to steady her pulse. This was her first time performing since Greg's passing, and though she'd rehearsed her lines for weeks, her voice trembled like it was her first open mic. Maya gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Just breathe, she whispered. You two were made for this. Then she disappeared into the wings. Jante was already on stage, mic in hand. The applause faded into silence as he began to speak, but something felt off. The words hung heavy. The rhythm didn't catch. The connection wasn't there. India stepped out, joining him under the lights. They exchanged a look, brief but loaded. She could tell he felt it too. The poem they'd rehearsed wasn't landing. It was good, polished even, but it wasn't true. Then something happened. A pulse. That quiet telepathy that had always existed between them stirred awake. Jante lowered the page in his hand, eyes closing as he spoke from memory. Something raw, unfinished, familiar. The moon and the stars seemed so content. India froze. Those were her words, her unfinished verse. Without thinking, she stepped closer to the mic and finished it. Like even if God had written them apart, they would have found themselves together anyway, even on a different planet. The audience stilled. The sound fell away. It was just them now. Jante opened his eyes, surprise flashing before a slow, knowing smile took over. He spoke again, letting instinct lead him. Their words wove together effortlessly. His line, her answer, his rhythm, her echo. They weren't performing anymore. They were communing. The crowd leaned in, afraid to miss a single breath. Each verse mirrored the other, his grief meeting her guilt, her hope softening his pain. By the final line, the audience was on their feet, clapping, shouting, crying, feeling. It wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. Off stage, Maya pressed a trembling hand to her chest, tears catching in her lashes. She'd always known. They were more than creative partners. They were pieces of the same poem, finally written whole. Under the lights, breathless and shaking, India turned to Jante. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. He reached out, lightly brushing her hand. The applause still roared as India and Jante walked off stage, hands brushing, breath still steady. The lights behind them dimmed. The echo of the crowd swelled, a wave of gratitude, disbelief, and love. Maya met them in the wings, eyes glistening, voice trembling with the kind of pride that only comes from witnessing something holy. She grabbed Jante by the arm before he could slip away. Don't let her walk out that door, she whispered, smiling through tears. He hesitated, his heart still hammering from the stage, from her. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice low, almost boyish. Maya's smile deepened. Then speak the only language you both understand. She stepped back, giving them space. The theater around them faded into soft murmurs and the faint hum of music bleeding from the house speakers. India stood just a few feet away, clutching her notebook to her chest, like she always did when she was fighting the weight of too many emotions. Jante walked toward her, slowly, purposefully. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation years in the making. He reached for her hand, fingers trembling as they slid into hers, and in that single touch, the noise, the grief, the time between them, it all dissolved. He took a breath, steady but reverent. Then, softly, as if offering a prayer, And you know it's true. I'd cross a million timelines and swim through the grandness of the universe just to be paired with you. Her eyes filled instantly, one tear slipping free. It traced the curve of her cheek before falling against his knuckles. A baptism in quiet truth. India smiled, trembling, the words barely audible but eternal. I know. A hush wrapped around them, warm, sacred, final. Two souls, one poem, one sacred puzzle, finally completed. Two hearts ready to love, even in pain, even in despair, because soulmates aren't complete without each other. And in a loveless world, the bravest thing you can do is give of yourself fully, even when you're scared to.